This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Mali military commander Assimi Goïta sworn in as interim president despite international condemnation. Boko Haram leader reportedly killed last month as Nigeria's military investigates those claims. And Egypt to produce the first batch of China's Sinovac vaccine by the end of June. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers, and here with the latest in business is Rama.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in about 30 minutes. In business leaders, finance ministers from the G7 strike a deal to set a minimum level for corporate income taxes. And Nigeria is pushing ahead with efforts to ramp up domestic power generation. We'll have the details on those stories and plenty more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Hannah.
Thanks for that, Rama. Well, we begin in Mali, where military commander Colonel Assimi Goïta has been sworn in as a new interim president. This comes after he led a second coup and ordered the arrest of President Bandao and Prime Minister Mokhtar Wane. The military leadership has faced an international backlash following the coup. France issued a temporary suspension of its military cooperation with Mali, while ECOWAS suspended the country's membership until 2022. Meanwhile, during a swearing-in ceremony in the capital Bamako, Goïta said that he was committed to the country's transition to civilian leadership as scheduled.
This new situation offers us the opportunity to put the process of transition back in the direction desired by the people. The legitimate expectations of the people are big. However, we have to reinforce our resilience and our hope for a better life. This is my responsibility as head of state, and I understand the magnitude of the task.
The African Union had also reacted to the developments in Mali by suspending the country's membership last week. The AU also threatened sanctions. For more details on what Mali's suspension from the AU and ECOWAS could mean for the country and the region, here's CGTN's Kelechi Emekelam.
Mali's second military coup in 9 months is putting the nation in dire straits. The country is having to contend with financial, economic, military and political seclusion. From France's suspension of its joint military operations with Mali to a halt in World Bank funding. Now it's being excluded from the continental and regional blocs, AU and ECOWAS. That has generated mixed reactions among political watchers in Nigeria.
When you sanction a country, who suffers from the implication of the sanction? The people on the ground, the citizens of Mali. You cannot give a sanction that will not affect the leadership. The only sanction that will affect the leadership is when you move into that country and overturn.
The ECOWAS and African Union don't have a choice, really, because coups used to be fairly constant, a constant feature in African politics until, fairly recently. So if this new phenomenon is allowed to go on unchecked in Mali, there's a tendency for what is called copycat by other African countries. Democracy is still very fragile in West Africa.
Mali's suspension is indefinite. The West African nation risks facing more sanctions if a civilian-led administration isn't restored. There have been claims of double standards having been applied by the AU and ECOWAS on Mali, compared to how a similar situation was handled in Chad, where major international powers overlooked the military takeover.
Mali is an outright coup, but the situation in Chad is a bit different. Obviously, ECOWAS and the African Union realizing, how tricky the situation is in Chad, probably, closed their eyes to the biological succession rather than having a political situation.
The Mali coup sparked deep concerns over stability in the volatile Sahel region. Thousands have been reported dead and over 500,000 displaced from their homes in the region. Experts say that the AU and ECOWAS sanctions may not be enough to restore civilian rule in Mali. They recommend a stronger and more tactical approach, including dialogue with the military administration in order to restore stability to the fragile political landscape in the West African nation. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, staying in West Africa, we head over to Nigeria now, where rival militant group ISWAP has announced the death of Boko Haram's leader, Abubakar Shekau. The announcement came via an audio recording. An individual claiming to be ISWAP's leader, Abu Musab al-Barnawi, says Shekau died last month. Barnawi alleges that the Boko Haram leader killed himself by detonating an explosive. This has yet to be officially confirmed. The Nigerian military says it has opened an investigation into the claims. Earlier, we spoke with CGTN's Deji Badmus, who is in Nigeria. He gave us this report.
That recording you talked about actually came from the leader of ISWAP. That's Abu Musab al-Barnawi, who is the leader of ISWAP. That's the breakaway faction of Boko Haram now. From the recording, it would appear we now have a clearer picture of what actually happened. According to the leader of ISWAP, the Boko Haram leader Shekau was not actually caught on the very day they launched the attack. According to him, he escaped, and after about 5 days he was found, and then he ran away again. Eventually they caught up with him, and they were actually talking to him to surrender and recognize the leadership of ISWAP when he decided to blow himself up. For now, the Nigerian military has not confirmed it. It's understandable. The reason why the Nigerian military and the government are being cautious is because, the Nigerian military in the past claimed on several occasions that he killed Abubakar Shekau only for him to resurface. So I think the government and the military are actually exercising caution, taking their time to confirm absolutely that this individual is dead.
Well, staying in Nigeria, at least 200 people were killed last week in a week alone, and over 100 people kidnapped. It's one of the worst weeks in Nigeria's recent reports of insecurity challenges. Our correspondent Tesema Kende reports from Jos.
Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has directed security agencies to put a stop to the killing of innocent citizens and rescue those abducted, especially the 136 children kidnapped from an Islamic school in Niger State about 2 weeks ago. This comes as a result of reports of violence across the country in the past 7 days. Last Sunday, an erstwhile advisor to former President Goodluck Jonathan, Ahmed Goodluck, was killed by suspected assassins in the southeastern state of Imo, Nigeria. In the same region, and on the same day, about 30 people were killed by gunmen across communities in Ebonyi State. In the country's northern region, the military says it killed 50 terrorists in Borno State, the epicenter of insurgency in Nigeria. About 7 people, including policemen, were shot dead on Wednesday when armed men attacked 2 banks and a police station in Osun State, southwestern part of the country. By Thursday, police reported that 88 people died from attacks by criminals in Kebbi State, while dozens of farmers were killed in Zamfara and Sokoto states. Meanwhile, the Niger State government says it has launched a search and rescue operation for the kidnapped school children. Tesem Akende, CGTN Jos, Nigeria.
The Boko Haram insurgency has had an enormous impact on northern Nigeria for over a decade. CGTN's Wilkinson Yawa tells us more about the group's leader.
Rumors of Abubakar Shekau's death swirled around for weeks before the militant group Islamic State West African Province came out to issue a statement. In an audio recording, a man believed to be ISWAP leader Abu Musab al-Barnawi said his fighters had sought the warlord on orders of Islamic State leadership, chasing him and offering him the chance to repent and join them. Al-Barnawi said, and I quote, "Shekau preferred to be humiliated in the afterlife than getting humiliated on earth, and he killed himself instantly by detonating an explosive," end of quote. Abubakar Shekau took over the reins of the Boko Haram militant group in 2009 after the original leader, Mohammed Yusuf, died in police custody. Shekau led the transformation of Boko Haram from an underground Islamic sect in 2009 to a fully fledged insurgency, killing, kidnapping, staging prison breaks and bombings, and looting its way across northeast Nigeria. Boko Haram means Western education is forbidden in the Hausa language spoken across Nigeria's north. Its main objective was to create an Islamic state under Sharia law. The group has killed more than 30,000 people, forced around 2 million people to flee their homes, and spawned a massive humanitarian crisis. Shekau's suicide bombers attacked not only churches and markets, but mosques too. His fighters abducted thousands of women for forced marriage and children for use as child soldiers. In 2014, Shekau's fighters kidnapped more than 270 schoolgirls from the town of Chibok, kicking off a global social media campaign dubbed Bring Back Our Girls and fronted by the likes of former U.S. First Lady Michelle Obama. Around 100 of the Chibok girls are still missing, and some are thought to have died in captivity. In recent years, the United States placed a $7 million bounty on Shekau's head. Wilkis Anyabwa, CGTN.
Well, for analysis on this issue, we're now joined from Lagos by Roy Okidebi, a security consultant and a retired military officer who also served in Nigeria's army. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. Let's just start with that. Under Abubakar Shekau, Boko Haram commanded a much dreaded reign of terror in that region. What impact could this report of his death likely have on the group's operations?
Well, thank you, Hannah, for the opportunity. Yeah, you see, right now, the people are jubilating, and because of Shekau's hard stance, he was brutal, he was extremely violent, and he was not careful about civilian casualties, you know, and those were the discord he had with Al-Banawi's faction. You know, they felt he should go against state actors, he should go against the government security agencies rather than going against innocent citizens. So right now, everybody is looking at the level of opportunity for ISIS and ISWAP to recruit people on sentiments. They have started to give benefits, handouts, and palliatives to the people concerning their welfare. So this is going to tell a lot about their recruitment drive.
Sir, so from what we know right now, we're still awaiting confirmation of the claims of the report of his death, but some experts think the death of Shekau could significantly weaken Boko Haram if it turns out that these reports are true. What opportunities does this provide for security forces working to defeat Boko Haram?
Well, for the Nigerian security agencies and the West African government security agencies, right now we understand that they need to review the current status of the ISWAP and ISIS, and they need to review the attack and defense mechanism of the new terror groups. And we need to understand also that they will have proper funding now, and more equipment, more intelligence. So all other government agencies in West African province and the Sahel need to come up with renewed and enhanced defensive measures.
Thank you so much for all that, sir. Mr. Roy Okidebi, a security consultant and retired military officer, also served in Nigeria's army. Well, the Libyan Presidency Council has begun month-long reconciliation talks. This series of meetings will focus on getting the views of all Libyan tribes before coming up with a national reconciliation agreement. The council is also expected to give recommendations to strengthen a ceasefire that is currently in place. Adel Imruhi reports.
Until the end of June, Libya's Presidency Council will be leading a national reconciliation forum. The month-long talks are expected to involve all Libyan tribes. The talks aim to come up with a set of recommendations to build trust and unify the nation's fractured communities.
The more Libyan talks we lead, the better, and the closer we get to a solution. Whenever room is given for foreign intervention, the deeper the division becomes. The international community led to the Libyan crisis. The intervention fueled the tension. When it comes to Libyan tribes, I don't believe there is any issue that cannot be agreed upon. They are more likely to agree and reconcile.
Libya's current transitional authority realized that it might not be able to reach a full reconciliation agreement before the December elections end its term in office. To create a strong foundation for this initiative, the leaders of tribes are also expected to agree on the guidelines that will regulate the operation of the Libyan National Reconciliation Commission. The new Libyan body should take over social cohesion efforts regardless of who runs the country.
The commission is important. It is the body that will organize the coming elections and also work on the freedom of movement for Libyans between the south, west and east. The presence of mercenaries in Libya's central region poses a huge threat to achieving that. This is a strategic region that connects all Libyans. The presence of mercenaries is a big risk that jeopardizes Libyans' freedom to mobilize and vote.
Like the rest of the nation, the reconciliation talks face serious challenges. They're threatened by the absence of an effective authority that enjoys power over all regions, which could guarantee a nationwide acceptance of the discussion's outcomes. To empower the forum, Libya's Presidency Council invited the European Union, the United Nations and the African Union to monitor the talks.
Libya's unity government has so far managed to unify almost all government institutions. The only exceptions are security bodies. A successful national reconciliation would help in unifying the police and military and would provide a strong foundation for sustainable stability in the country. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Well, let's now take a short break. On return, Egypt to produce the first batch of China's Sinovac vaccine by the end of June.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. Well, Chinese President Xi Jinping is visiting northwest China's Qinghai province. He inspected local businesses on Monday and learned about how enterprises develop their businesses and boost employment. The president also visited a Communist Party office at a local community to inspect cultural efforts in promoting solidarity among different ethnic groups. Well, Chinese President Xi Jinping visited Egypt in 2016. One of the Egyptian politicians who met the Chinese president was Alaa Abed, the head of the majority party in Egypt's parliament and vice president of the Arab Parliament Assembly. CGTN's Yasser Kim spoke to Alaa Abed about that visit.
How did you come to meet President Xi Jinping, and what was your first impression when we met the president?
I had the honor to welcome the president of China, and since the first moment I met him, I felt I'm in front of a real leader who values China's position in the world. He deserves to be the leader of a world power with the biggest influence on the economies worldwide.
Did you have any personal conversation with President Xi Jinping, and what was it about?
In the meeting at Parliament, a few subjects were raised. The first conversation was about Chinese relations with the regional countries and especially Egypt, the strategic and economic ties. Secondly, during talks I was involved in with the presence of His Excellency, it was clear he is a leader who seeks peace, seeks stability and seeks for China to always be at the forefront of the economic scene. He wants real, strong relations that would build mutual benefits economically, socially, politically, and militarily.
How do you see President Xi Jinping's governance and leadership of China?
He has given a lot and will give more to the great Chinese people, and he can give even more to the nations around the world. Today, every house in the world has a Chinese-made component or appliance. Every house in the world is aware of China's size and power, whether militarily, politically, economically. It's clear to all that Mr. Xi loves his country, a leader who was able to completely transform China before and now.
Meanwhile, the Treasurer General of the South African Communist Party, Joyce Moloi-Moropa, says that the Chinese Communist Party's leadership and its commitment to meeting the needs of people has brought about positive change in China over a short period of time. But just how did China develop from a semi-feudal and semi-colonial country into the world's second largest economy in just 70 years? CGTN's Wakasanyawa reports.
China, through the CPC.
According to the Treasurer General of the South African Communist Party, Joyce Moloi-Moropa, China's Communist Party has been able to remain relevant throughout the years because of great leadership skills.
What makes them to be completely relevant and to be able to stand the test of time? It's how they develop their leadership. They're very serious in terms of the leadership vision. They do have a way of how leadership is brought on board. What also becomes the best thing is that the Chinese do know what is the interest of the people on the ground. And therefore, whatever they do it for the people. And therefore, that is why they're succeeding. And that is why we appreciate and actually say to them, this is the best thing they've ever done for the world.
Moloi-Moropa has praised China, saying the country has set a good example for many countries when it comes to poverty eradication and economic development.
China, through the CPC, has actually driven all the development, all the economy, changing the lives of the rural people in the area, because we normally come and do exchange and visit them. We can see a place sometime when we visit. The next time around, it's changed and turned around. And we appreciate that kind of leadership. We wish them all the best. We going forward, and we hope this 100 years, which is the centenary, a huge milestone. It's something that we congratulate them about.
Like many African countries, South Africa is currently focusing on stamping out corruption in the country. Moloi-Moropa says China's zero tolerance has allowed South Africa to learn a lot about dealing with corruption.
The Chinese have this program of curbing corruption, which is fighting with the tigers, and then dealing with the flies, and also, chasing after the foxes. And therefore, that strategy is very critical. It's something we want to really learn quite closer, because when they fight with the tigers, they do not make an exclusion. It's the upper level, senior level of the Chinese government, where they are senior leaders. They do fight with them head on, as they have the strategy of fighting with the tigers. I can say we are actually starting to fight with the tigers as well.
Under the leadership of the Communist Party, China has also offered assistance to developing countries during the COVID-19 pandemic, a move that Moloi-Moropa says not only saved thousands of lives, but also played a vital role in the containment of the coronavirus. According to Moloi-Moropa, South Africa's Communist Party wants to emulate China's experience over the past century.
When the World Health Organization approved the use of the CoronaVac COVID-19 vaccine developed by Chinese Sinovac for emergency use, Egypt welcomed that decision. Cairo has invested in facilities to manufacture the doses locally. The first batch of 2 million doses is expected to be produced by the end of June. Here's Adel Mruki with the details.
Egypt has welcomed the World Health Organization's approval of Sinovac's CoronaVac for emergency use. Cairo had earlier signed an agreement with the vaccine producer to manufacture its jabs domestically.
The Chinese technology is highly advanced, and I know well that the advancement in the manufacturing of pharmaceutical products as a whole, and particularly the vaccines, after the pandemic of COVID-19. The target from this partnership is to use Egypt as a hub to send or to export these medicines and these vaccines to the Arab countries nearby Egypt and also the African continent, because you know well that the China products or Chinese products, particularly in medicine and the vaccines, have a very good reputation in the African continent.
The CEO of the government's vaccine manufacturing arm, Vaxera, says the production line for CoronaVac will begin churning out the jabs in mid-June. Since May 21, Chinese experts have been working on transferring the Chinese technology to Egypt and setting up the quality control system to oversee the production of the jab. Experts say the step means that such a partnership will put Egypt in a place to assist in further developing the vaccine.
Any vaccine have been produced in the past period will undergo a lot of modifications to face the viral infection more accurately. I'm sure that the clinical trials will go on after the results of these vaccines have been published in the past period. This will be modified to have a more and more effective results to reach near the 100% efficacy.
Egypt says that it's planning to produce some 2 million doses by the end of June. Before rolling the vaccines out to the public, they must get the Egyptian drug authorities' approval, a process that could take up to 16 weeks. Meanwhile, Vaxera will continue producing and storing the CoronaVac jab. Sinovac will routinely export the raw biomaterial needed for the vaccine until Egypt is ready to produce it locally. The CoronaVac vaccines made in Egypt will be rolled out in 2 jabs administered 3 weeks apart.
Egypt has not yet announced a price tag for the much-needed COVID-19 vaccine. Expectations are it will be offered at an internationally competitive price, while domestically it will be distributed by the government and offered for free. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Over in Uganda, President Yoweri Museveni has reimposed a strict lockdown that includes a closure of schools and the suspension of inter-district travel. The president says the aim of the latest measures is to curb a surge in COVID-19 cases in the country. Leon Senyange reports.
There was a visible rush of parents picking their children up from school after the closure of all education institutions. The new measures took effect on Monday. Some of these students were only 3 weeks into a new school term.
It has affected us too much. Yeah, as in you have concentrated, you are trying to catch up with the teachers, catching up with the notes, and you know you are in moods of books.
Some parents worry their children are more at risk of harm away from school.
Government should have been more strict on schools. We are taking the children home. We work away from our homes. We shall instead be bringing the disease to the children.
But school infections have been a major concern. According to government statistics, there were 948 reported cases in 43 schools since March this year. There has also been an increase in cases among young people, most aged between 20 and 39 years. Health officials say the poor compliance to the standard operating procedures like washing hands and wearing a face mask have led to a surge in cases. The capital, Kampala, is the most affected, registering an average 500 cases per day. To curb further spread, inter-district travels have also been banned, except for the metropolitan part of the capital, Kampala. Religious gatherings and weekly open markets are suspended too.
Travel from Category A countries, as defined by the Minister of Health, remains suspended except for returning Ugandans. At the moment, only India is listed as Category A.
The restrictions will be implemented for 42 days. Uganda has recorded over 53,000 cases and at least 383 deaths since the first reported case in March last year. Despite efforts to curb the spread through vaccination, vaccine shortages have hampered progress so far. Over 748,000 people have received their first dose. An additional 175,000 doses from the COVAX facility are expected this month.
In addition, government will secure 300,000 doses of Sinovac vaccine donated by our friends, the Chinese government. But I want to buy. I don't want to depend on donations. We shall buy. We shall buy from Johnson & Johnson, the Americans, from these Chinese, and even from the Russians.
The government hopes to vaccinate at least 21 million people over the next 12 months. Leon Sanyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
The final round of the Zimbabwean edition of the Chinese Bridge Contest is just concluded at the University of Zimbabwe. This year's contest was held under the theme One World, One Family. Through speeches and cultural performances, 6 contestants from different departments of the university shared their Chinese learning stories and showcased their mastery of the Chinese language. The contestants also took quizzes concerning Chinese culture and current affairs. In the second round, the contestants highlighted their talents through various cultural performances. The Chinese Bridge is an annual worldwide Chinese speaking and performance competition for international students. It aims to strengthen the world's understanding of the Chinese language and culture.
I'm not sure if we'll be going to China because of COVID, but that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to take part in the international competition, and I'm going to do my best to represent this country well and learn more. Mostly I just want to learn more about Chinese, increase the Chinese level, and keep on getting better, because it's still not that good, but it's improving. But when you look at how China is like a world superpower in terms of economics, and also the good relationship between Zimbabwe and China in terms of economics again, I think being an economist who can speak Chinese is very necessary in Zimbabwe and in the world.
And with that, it's time now to get into the latest in business with Rama.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in business news. In business, leaders from the G7 have struck a deal to set a floor for global corporate income tax rates. And Nigeria forges ahead with efforts to increase domestic power generation levels. Details coming up next.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's start in the world of global tax policy. Leaders from the group of 7 nations made up of some of the world's largest economies have reached a deal to pursue higher global tax rates, especially on multinational entities like Google, Apple and Amazon. It's a move that could, in theory, raise hundreds of billions of dollars to help them cope with the aftermath of the economic aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, the G7 have agreed to also back a global minimum corporate income tax rate of at least 15%. Companies are also expected to pay more tax in a market so they actually do business, where they sell the goods and services. This deal has been years in the making, and it also pledges to end national digital service taxes levied by the UK, France and other countries around the world. Now, the United States had previously argued that these taxes unfairly targeted US tech giants, but these new measures first must get a much broader agreement at a meeting of the G20 that's due to take place in Venice. Back to the continent, Nigeria says it plans to grow its domestic power generation capacity to 11,000 megawatts by next year. And this is coming as it scales up measures to improve power production, transmission and distribution. Nigeria's power generation capacity currently is around 5,000 megawatts, so that gives you a sense of the scale of the leap that's required here. Even though the country has 13,000 megawatts of installed generation capacity, more than half of the power generated is lost, partly due to dilapidated transmission infrastructure, or in some cases a complete lack of fuel, in particular natural gas. The government says it's working with foreign investors to improve the country's energy infrastructure. In East Africa, Tanzania's Energy Ministry has requested an 8% budget increase to fund development projects. Authorities there say some of that cash will go into finalising one of the biggest projects in the pipeline, the over 2,000 megawatt Julius Nyerere hydroelectric power plant. The government says it plans to focus on ensuring that it can generate sufficient, reliable, clean and cost-effective electricity. With the details, here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo.
Tanzania's Ministry of Energy is looking for an 8% boost to its 2021-2022 budget. The government says it wants to use some of the funds to complete the biggest energy project the country has ever undertaken, the Julius Nyerere hydropower plant. The minister in charge says the project is more than half completed and when finished is expected to double electricity generation. The government aims to start filling the dam with water in November.
We will fill the dam till 25th of April next year. By then, our hydro plant will have enough water to start generating electricity. And like I said before, by 14th of June 2021, we will connect it to the national grid, which will switch on the transformers and citizens will start getting electricity.
The project is expected to play a major role in pushing the country's industrial drive. For instance, the hydropower plant is expected to supply 70 megawatts of electricity to power the first phase of a new railway.
As a country, because of the development goals, is in urgent need to have sufficient power to power its own industries and its infrastructure. As you know, Tanzania is now constructing a standard gauge railway, which is going to be powered with electricity. So the need to have sufficient funding to the Ministry of Energy cannot be overstated.
Data released by Tanzania's Energy Supply Authority shows that currently the country produces 1,604 megawatts. The Ministry of Energy says it is currently working on a number of power generation projects in an effort to meet the goal of producing 5,000 megawatts by the year 2025. With Tanzania looking to enter the Africa Free Trade Area, the ministry says it is imperative that the country boosts its industrial capacity so as to export a wide range of products into this 1.3 billion people market. To do this, the industries which will be located in Tanzania will need to be supplied with adequate power. Between April 2020 and April this year, more than 18,844 institutions were connected, making a total of 28,044 electrified institutions in the country. This coming budget is also expected to provide electricity to 1,956 villages that are yet to be supplied with electricity.
The prospect of Tanzania becoming an economic superpower giant in the context of East Africa community is real if these infrastructure projects will be implemented and the energy projects finalized.
Tanzania's economic development goals rely heavily on access to reliable energy. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Back into West Africa, a prolonged dry season in Cote d'Ivoire, the world's largest producer of cocoa, is being blamed for inadequate power supplies. A drop in electricity generation in the world's largest cocoa producer since late April has left households and businesses absolutely fuming. As CGTN's Mohamed Abubakar now explores.
Cote d'Ivoire is facing a generation deficit of about 200 megawatts, or nearly 10% of its 2,230 megawatts capacity. Most power companies in the West African nation are producing at reduced capacity. The country's energy ministry blames low water levels at hydroelectric dams, a problem that some have attributed to climate change, and lack of supplies for the nation's two gas-fired power plants.
This is a situation that is widespread. We have no water in the dams. Today we are at a very low level. We are at 83.92. When we compare this to last year, it should be around 88. So we are 5 meters below the level we should normally have. At the moment, we have no rainfall. It's not raining. We are going through a period of drought.
Over the last decade, Cote d'Ivoire has received millions of dollars from lending institutions to maintain its privately run energy plant in line with the World Bank prescriptions to sell off state-run industries, a concept endorsed by President Alassane Ouattara. While the World Bank praises the government for supplying electrical power to its citizens, A USAID survey shows that about 1.8 million households still have no electricity. Consumers, unions and business leaders have also sounded an alarm over recent waves of blackouts that's hitting major cities, including the economic capital Abidjan and its 5 million residents.
We got the message about the power cuts. We are told that there's a program that is being followed. Unfortunately, the program is not being followed. I have clients that mainly come at lunchtime. Today I'm cut off from noon to 6 p.m. I have no air conditioning. I have no lights. I can't even serve coffee. I can't do anything. The customers cannot eat in the heat.
Experts say the power crisis is overwhelming CIE, the country's monopoly electricity supplier, and want the government to intervene. Côte d'Ivoire Consumers Confederation has already flagged the problem in a letter to the Prime Minister Patrick Archie. The group's presidents say the nation is heading for a 200-megawatt shortfall in power between April and August this year. He argues that CIE wants to compensate for the deficit by imposing rolling outages on 145 major industrial companies over 5 months.
You may not have worked, but you have to pay your tax obligations. At the same time, if you have not paid your water and electricity bills, you have the 10% penalty. As your income goes down, your charges are kept at a certain level. So that's why we call on the government to intervene, obviously to balance things out so as not to stifle consumers.
Côte d'Ivoire has set down the ambitious goal of nearly doubling power supply to 4,000 megawatts by the end of 2030. 3/4 of the country's energy supply is produced by 2 gas-fired plants at Cipril and Azito, with the remainder from hydroelectric dams. Mohamed Abubakar, CGTN.
Into East Africa, Kenya's flower sector is turning to China's lucrative market in an effort to boost and diversify earnings away from traditional markets in Western Europe. But the aftershocks from the COVID-19 pandemic are still being felt quite deeply in the sector, despite a mild rebound. Robert Nagila has that story.
It's mid-morning at the Redlands Roses flower farm in Ruiru, about 45 kilometers from Nairobi. The first of 3 daily harvests is almost complete. There are over 200 variants of roses grown here in what can be described as a labor-intensive process from the point of planting to boxing. Kenya is the 3rd largest exporter of cut flowers, with Europe accounting for about 70% of its roses. In 2019, flower exports generated about $1 billion in sales. To boost sales, more farms like Redlands have entered the lucrative Chinese market.
We started 5 years ago because it's a very big country, so a big volume of consumers and a big volume of high acquisitive power.
After harvest, the flowers are taken for processing to identify quality roses for export. The flower farm exports spray roses to China. These have more than 1 flower per stem.
Because of the COVID, the business stopped quite a long time in China. We were at about 100 boxes to 200 boxes a week, and currently we are at 100 boxes, but it's increasing.
Like other sectors, flower exports plunged at the onset of the pandemic. But as global markets have reopened, the sector has rebounded. But the after effects are still being felt.
We have a very limited number of cargo planes moving from Kenya to China weekly. So this is really a major problem, is to find freight capacity. It's limiting really our growth in China.
Currently, only China Southern Airlines operates cargo freight between the 2 countries. Back at Redlands, the final process, boxing the fresh flowers, is underway. From here, they'll be transported to the airport and onto a plane for the Chinese market. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
A combination of poor management, crumbling infrastructure, embezzlement and looting, particularly during 2 massive wars in the DRC in 1997 and 2003, has left that country's Bakwanga mine crippled by debt and at the mercy of plummeting commodity prices. The mine shut down at the peak of the 2008 financial crisis, and it resumed operations in 2011. But even today, it's still a shadow of its former self. Let's take a look at how it's doing.
Buji-Mayi has seen better days. It was once the home of DR Congo's state diamond company, the Bakwanga Mining Company. The town used to be filled with free-spending miners and their families who brought a giddy touch of prosperity to the remote Kasai Oriental province. But at the end of the last century, Bakwanga, locally known as Miba, began to go into a long downward spiral, taking the town with it. Locals are hopeful for a comeback.
The mine is operational, exploitation is underway, but at a minimal level. Mining has resumed with a view to relaunching with the help of the government. $5 million a payment that Gekamin gave to Miba. Excavation equipment was purchased and a complete new plant was bought.
Set up in 1961, Miba is 80% state-owned, while a Belgian company, Cybeca, has a 20% stake. A government audit published in May 2020 revealed serious dysfunction. Last August, President Felix Tshisekedi moved to release $5 million to allow the mining firm to get back on its feet. The first $3 million went to rehabilitating a diamond processing plant at Dizele and the purchase of a new one with an hourly capacity for 200 tons of ore. From an annual output averaging 6 million carats, mainly of industrial diamonds in the early 2000s, production was no more than 500,000 carats in 2008 and half of that in 2011. In the 80s, some 40,000 workers and their families drew their sustenance from the mining company. In contrast, today, Miba owes several months of back pay to its employees.
The government owes Miba a lot of money. It does not have the will to pay this debt. If they pay Miba, Kasai will be much better off.
We are waiting for the salaries for the services rendered to Miba. We do not know our fate. We are like people cast away or refugees. We suffer greatly. Several of us have died without receiving a pension for services rendered.
Operations have resumed in only one of the company's 13 zones. However, it is said it may easily have more than 40 million carats of diamonds and by itself represents 78% of Miba's kimberlite reserves. Meanwhile, the resumption of activity by Miba appears to have little impact on the people of Buji-Mayi. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Two quick stories outside the continent, starting with China's foreign currency reserves. They're the world's largest. They rose by more than expected in the month of May amid a weak dollar. Official data from the People's Bank of China shows that the country's forex reserves went up by $23 billion to $3.22 trillion last month. That data showed that the value of China's gold reserves also went up to $119 billion at the end of May, from $110.73 billion by the end of April. Now, foreign inflows into Chinese stocks and bonds have been pretty strong as the world's second largest economy gallops ahead of other large economies in its recovery from the pandemic. And finally, some of the latest trade data coming out of China as well. The country's total imports and exports grew by 28% year on year to reach about $2.31 trillion in the first 5 months of the year. According to the latest data from the General Administration of China, the country's exports were up 40% year on year between January and May. Imports surged by more than 30% over the same period. The trade surplus expanded by 56.2% year on year to over $203 billion. In the first 5 months, China's foreign trade with major partners, including ASEAN countries, the EU and the US, all saw growth. The ASEAN bloc was China's biggest trading partner. Trade was up nearly 30% compared to a year ago. I'll leave you there for the time being, but I'll be back in Global Business Africa. We'll be talking about budget a lot this week. Starting in Ethiopia, the country has approved a $13 billion draft spending plan for the coming fiscal year, which starts in July. But what exactly is involved in this spending plan and how is it going to be funded? We'll have some details on that and plenty more at the top of the hour. See you then. For now, back to Hannah.
We look forward to that, Rama. We'll see you at the top of the hour. Let's now take a short break and return with sport news, including... We speak with two sprinters